Hi, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Jessica Lyons, Cybersecurity Editor with the Register, and I'm talking with Drew Schmitt. Drew is the ransomware negotiator and practice lead for GuidePoint Research and Intelligence team. Hi, Drew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We see ransomware in the headlines basically every day. It seems that there's another attack. They're hitting critical infrastructure targets regularly, demanding more ransoms. And it just seems that there's been quite an uptick and a lot more aggressive techniques over the last year. But I'm curious what you see in your role. You're dealing with a lot of these ransomware groups in your job. So what have you seen in terms of changing tactics?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that, really doesn't make it to the general public is the fact that ransomware has been around for a long time, and they've been doing this for a very, very long time. There's definitely been, some escalations in terms of how they deal with their victims. But, starting with their single extortion, encrypting files, and then moving into data exfiltration and stealing files from environments and holding that for ransom. And now one of the things that we've really started to see quite a bit from some of the bigger groups is just more escalating and coercive tactics like releasing sensitive data, sneak peeks into medical records and things of that nature, really to just put more pressure on these victims of ransomware.
Talk a little bit about that too. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to say with the more aggressive techniques too. Have you seen one thing that I've heard a lot about is more personal techniques too, trying to get at the victim's family members or just turning up the heat that way. So it's more personal. It's not just business, for lack of a better word. Or is that something you're seeing as well?
It's definitely something that we're starting to see more often. I think what we do see more commonly is when they're trying to reach out and put more pressure onto the victims' customers and business relationships. They reach out, downstream and try to invoke more responses from that perspective. That's something we see quite often, and that's in the form of emails. Sometimes that's phone calls. But we definitely are starting to see more of that personal approach and trying to get, more of that pressure on high-level executives to pay ransoms, really playing on the emotional side of things, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And talk a little bit about the role that you play in this. What's your job as a negotiator?
Yeah. So, what we're doing in the cases of, ransomware incidents that require more of a trusted advisor to initiate some of the conversations with threat actors is, we are really playing more of that role of trusted advisor rather than really thinking of ourselves as negotiators. I think, inherently, individuals will think of like payment first is the first thing that comes to mind when you're talking about negotiator, when in reality, we're focused more on the recovery side of things. There may be a situation where there is a payment made or a settlement made with a threat actor, but it's all geared towards recovery for the victim rather than paying the threat actor, if that makes sense. So there is the whole process of facilitating the communications and the conversations, but there's also an intelligence component to that. So while we're also simultaneously working towards potentially settling, we're also gathering all kinds of intelligence on what the threat actors did, how they did it, and ultimately any other information that's again focused on the recovery side of things.
Right. And one thing that I've heard from some other threat analysts is that the negotiators sometimes can be part of the problem, or they're perceived as being part of the problem. So I want you to defend your role a little bit. I've heard calls for these roles to be a little more regulated, but how do you respond to that type of criticism when we do have the U.S. government, FBI saying don't negotiate, don't pay the ransom? So how do you respond to this type of questioning?
Yeah, I think it really plays into the trusted advisor role more than, really focusing on myself as a negotiator. When we're talking about, these types of situations on my team, we're talking about threat actor communications rather than negotiations, because there is so much more that goes into what we do other than just, making a payment. Again, the term negotiator really comes along with, the idea of a payment, which, we don't focus on that piece of it. When it comes down to it, we are there to advise on risk. We are there to have conversations with threat actors, again, focused on recovery rather than, moving towards a payment. We don't advocate really necessarily with our clients of, you should or should not make a payment. We advise the risk associated with the current situation. We put it in the context of the incident response investigation. And if it's determined by, legal counsel and the client and other portions of the response effort that a payment is needed to obtain a decryptor that can help them get moving in the right direction, that's something we facilitate. But again, it's not about the negotiation. It's about the recovery of the victim.
Right. And another thing we've seen recently is a greater uptick in international law enforcement takedowns. And I'm curious if this has had the intended effect of slowing and hopefully eventually stopping ransomware.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing from my perspective, and it was quite exciting for our team to see some of this stuff happen. The biggest thing really that I think of in this case is it proved that some of the biggest groups, the biggest names in ransomware are not untouchable. They definitely were impacted. And in some cases, it was more of a short-term impact to begin with, such as we saw with Lockbit. Alpha obviously has gone through something that's a little bit more permanent, it seems. But I think the bigger thing is going to be seeing how these law enforcement takedowns have long-term impacts. Like we haven't really gotten out to that far on the time horizon yet. So it'll be really interesting to see just how much impact there is long term. But I think there definitely was some really positive short term impacts to these groups. It definitely made things harder for Lockbit. It seems to have brought to light some of the some confidence issues with respect to Lockbit's leadership. And so I think that there's been affiliates that have left their group specifically, which is I think a net positive for cybersecurity in general. So we definitely saw some really good impacts and some really good effects from the defender side of things. Like I said, I think the biggest and the most interesting piece of that will be how does that play out long term.
And what do you think? I mean, a lot of times we see the groups rebrand, or we see some of the affiliates move to other ransomware as a service organizations. So I know it's a little bit of a crystal ball question, but how do you see this playing out as we move into the future?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing evidence of other ransomware as a service groups really put some effort into advertisements, trying to get affiliates to come to their programs. And so I think, what we've seen with some of the different groups, I think that's definitely happening. I don't know that it's a large scale kind of departure from bigger groups like Lockbit yet, but there is some movement there. We're also seeing other groups, potentially like Ransom Hub that seem to be like there could be some rebrand type activity coming from Alpha on that side of things. And so I think, we're seeing a little bit in the shift in dynamic from that group, focusing on allowing affiliates to use their own crypto wallets and do some of the things that got Alpha into a little bit of a sticky situation from that perspective. So there is some evolution happening from the ransomware side of things and in the ecosystem as a whole. I think we're a little bit too, not far enough into it, I should say, to really determine how things are going to change, but there's definitely a shakeup going on.
Right. Another thing, we're hearing more of a call for a ban on ransom payments. Definitely pros and cons to this. It obviously would cut off money that's going to the ransomware actors, but it might be kind of difficult to implement in real life. So where do you fall on this debate, whether ransom payments should just be outright banned altogether?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's such a complex problem that we're looking at. I think that the biggest pitfall that I come across when having this conversation is that, there's an assumption in some cases that there's going to be a one-part solution, banning ransomware payments is the answer, when in reality, it could be part of the answer. And certainly if we focus on pursuing more of a payment ban, several years down the line, giving more incentives to improve security over time, focusing on really bolstering up the defensive side of things, moving in and recovery capabilities rather, moving into a scenario where there might be a ransomware payment ban. I think that's something that is definitely a possibility. But again, one of the hardest pieces here is to assume that a ransom payment ban is going to have the impact that we think it is going to have. There's obviously some pieces that make things a little bit more difficult when we're talking about banning ransomware payments and namely, additional workarounds. Obviously, the United States can only focus on the United States. And so there's opportunities for non-US companies to still make payments and facilitate something that's a little bit more under the table for, acquiring decryptors and preventing data leakage and things of that nature. But I think, really the one piece that really sticks out to me is the incentivizing of improving security, whether that's through, things like cyber insurance, or it's going to be having the federal government even provide some tooling or something that can help small and medium-sized businesses. Really, it's going to be providing that incentive to want to be more proactive about cybersecurity.
So kind of the carrot and the stick approach, it sounds like, with maybe more carrot, at least initially, than stick moving into this.
Yeah, I think that could definitely work. And really, again, it's going to require out of the box thinking. One of the things that's remained consistent and constant over the last 10 years of cybersecurity has been that threat actors adapt and they find ways to monetize their activities. And so we just have to remain just as flexible as they are and think outside the box. And I think if we do that, we're going to make some real strides.
Well, and it sounds like at some level, the federal government is going to play a role in this as we work to mitigate the threat. What role do you think that they should play? What should we be seeing from more of a policy perspective from the federal government when it comes to ransomware?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is really that the federal government's going to have to lead by example. They're really going to have to take that traditional leadership role and help bring the public and private sectors together. Right now, public and private are really kind of two different areas of the overall kind of organizational or business kind of outlook. And I think really bringing those together for the mutual benefit of the country and the economy and things of that nature is going to be huge. So first and foremost, I think that the federal government needs to take lead from that side of things. Right. I think what comes along with that is going to be improving and increasing federal law enforcement capabilities. We already talked about federal law enforcement takedowns, and obviously that was in large due to cooperation with international agencies. But focusing on giving the FBI and other organizations like that more capabilities to do more investigations, to make it make sense at the larger level and start connecting dots. That's going to be really huge for moving forward with more takedowns, more enforcement actions. And that's going to make things really difficult for threat actors to be successful and to really maintain that low overhead approach that they have right now. So really, it'll make it a lot harder on their lives. And lastly, I kind of hit on this already a little bit, but providing resources and capabilities for organizations to take advantage of is going to be another area where they could really help improve security. And I think the greatest example of this is CISA just recently released a free public malware sandbox that individuals can submit samples to, and they can get feedback on indicators of compromise and how that sample acts within the environment, and ultimately gives CISA the opportunity to correlate that malware sample across a larger view, which a lot of organizations don't have. So that's a really great example, and I was really excited to see that as a tool available. And if we could see more tools like that being provided that are free for organizations to use, that would be huge and would go a long way for improving security.
Right. Well, let's hope organizations are taking advantage of those tools too, the ones that are out there.
Absolutely.